Om Chayu Shantihi Antariksham Shantihi Prithvi Shantihi Apoho Shantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanashpataya Shantihi Vishvadeva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Sarvam Shantihi Shantareva Shantarsoma Shantaredi Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. There is peace in the sky and peace on earth. There is peace in the waters, peace on land. There is peace with the gods and goddesses, peace with man and woman and child. Peace is with peace. May this very peace enter into us and permeate it to the very core of our being. Om, peace, peace, peace. For there shines Brahman. May that Brahman protect us. May that Brahman sustain us. May that Brahman illumine our thinking process and reveal to us the essence of the scriptures and remove all obstacles to the path. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us and may peace be unto all. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Tat Sat. With that, one of the 7 peace chants, we enter into what is now the 3rd class of the Paingala Upanisad. I composed a chart for that as we looked at pretty thoroughly over the first 2 classes. It took up a lot of time because it's so filled with Yajnavalkya, who's this rishi, Vedic rishi that's so revered by all, and who appears several times in the different Upanishads, appears in the forefront of this Upanishad for the entire extent of it, along with his qualified student, Paingala. So he's telling him about all the worlds that are folded into the cloth of consciousness. When that cloth does get folded at the behest of many different forces acting upon it, you might say, all coming out of the formless, which Paingala is asking about at the beginning of the Upanishad, as you remember. He calls it the supreme mystery of aloneness. So he wants to approach the great teacher who is supportless, and or you might say whose only support is the non-dual Brahman, and find out how Yajnavalkya became that way. And so he approaches him and asks him about that spiritual mystery of the supreme state of aloneness. So since Brahman, which is formless, cannot really be described fully, it can be spoken about, it can be talked around, it can be inferred, like Buddha pointing to a star close to another star, or to the moon, to show that a certain location in space. And in that way, you can point to things that are very close to Brahman in order to infer Brahman. That's sort of the supreme mystery explained right there. In that case, then, the first thing is avyakta, which is brought out by Yajnavalkya. So he can't start talking about the formless Brahman. So he wants to point to the nearest thing to it, which is avyakta, which is the unmanifested prakriti that holds everything in abeyance, in seeds. So I've composed another chart a couple days ago for chapter 2, because we finished chapter 1. But I want to put an exclamation point on chapter 1. We could show the chart really quick, and we can run through it very briefly. Basically, it starts off with the unmanifested prakriti, which is everything held in abeyance in seeds. So basically, when everything goes into what materialists call a void, or some philosophers called empty, it's actually what's happening is everything's just returning to its seed essence. In the case of nature, its seed essence is not sentient. It just goes back to the seed ideas, which are in words, like Om, Aim, Hring, Kring, Klim, Shrim, and so forth. You know them. You've heard about them. They're called bijams or seeds. There are a couple of those in your mantra. And that's why you want to bring out those hidden facets by reciting your mantra, because one of those words in your mantra is also Ishvara, usually, God with form. So in the case of Avyaktam, the seedless state is Brahman, beyond that. But it's how everything, how Brahman becomes the Jiva. It's the name of the next chart that I composed. I'll show you in a few minutes for chapter 2. But basically, this is Yajnavalkya explaining that the supreme mystery of aloneness isn't just assumed to be, the soul is all alone without any supports around it. It's got everything in it. So that's hardly the aloneness that we would describe as being lonely in a sentimental way. That people sing hundreds and thousands of songs about in pop culture and so forth. I'm so alone. Not that kind of aloneness. It's like it means it's finally been released into its essence, and it's free in its essence. It's neither with form or beyond form. It's originless. So it's just Vedanta's way and Buddhism's way too of explaining how everything's rising. Phenomena, they call that. And that phenomena stretches from human bodies, causal bodies, subtle bodies, which we'll look at today, all the way into worlds, all the way down into the objects inside of worlds, the 5 elements and so forth, are all inside of that seated state. And they're unoriginated in the sense that when the mind-ego complex is formed, as we saw later on in the process of cosmic unfoldment, you might call it here, then you see these things start manifesting out of their seated state. So they were always there. It's not creating something out of nothing. Nothing's new under the sun. Those are important sayings, even in Christianity, to understand properly, which Vedanta will unwrap for different religions too. And so they're always there. They were just in their unseen state. That's the case with everything, from your loved ones down to a grain of sand, or from Brahman down to a clump of grass, as Yajnavalkya is about to say here to Paingala, a famous phrase out of the Upanishads. So it's just as if something was there and then it's not, because there's a covering power. And we've tried to explain that in many ways, so that we would get away from this idea of there being a nothingness somehow, or a void that's eternal, or that we have no soul. We're just nothing but animals. Those kinds of ideas are destroyed and dissolved by learning the philosophy and finding out that it's just a matter of, if you remember the word in the last 2 weeks, concealment. So this is all concealment that's going on, and it's about to give rise to uncovering or revelation. And that's what's happening as it all comes down trickles down from the formless form to causality, to subtlety, to grossness. And that's what we'll talk about later today, called the 3 bodies. Yajnavalkya has to answer that question next, which I'll repeat when I get there. As Paingala's next question is, teach me the aloneness, the mystery of aloneness. This is, how does Brahman become Jiva? Because when Yajnavalkya ends up describing the state of the Jiva here, after unmanifested Prakriti has been appeared in the great mind via these seed vibrations, and then a cosmic personality has developed out of that called Virat, who's taking care of the whole cosmic egg, Hiranyagarbha, the whole thing, all worlds, and they're about to become manifest. And the 4 stages of the word are another way to teach this. then everything subtle begins to happen. Like, oh, those worlds are going to need to be peopled, and those peoples are going to have to be sustained. And in order to give them sustenance, I'm going to have to create the subtle principles for that sustenance. So we're going to start off with tanmatras, for instance, subtle elements. And so all of these things then will turn into a subtle state, and people will have a subtle body to enjoy that. We'll look at that in a minute. Souls will develop a subtle body from a causal body. That is like coming out of deep sleep into dreaming, and then coming out of dreaming and awaking is creating a waking state body in order to be sustained by all of these tattvas or principles that are there when the cloth gets unfolded. Cosmic consciousness begins to manifest itself. Many, many folds in that. So that's all a really quick review of this so that we just have it in a nutshell in our mind that this is what Yajnavalkya is telling his prize student there. As it came down further into the subtle elements, then it turned into the gross elements. So when we look for the cause of earth, air, fire, water, and ether, since we don't have anything called tanmatra in our ideology in the West or in our philosophy or in our religion, then we're thinking that that came from earth, that everything came from earth or from space and then from earth. But both of those had to have an origin too, and their origin was the kingdoms of heaven within, not out here. So the internal lands are not seen by people here. They only see the outside. The senses are defective by nature. They're only outgoing, the Mandukya Upanishad says. I'm sorry, the Mundaka Upanishad says. They're outward, they're defective because they're outward by nature. So it's like, the eye sees everything, but it can't see itself. Or you can only see forward, but you don't know what's happening behind you. So that translates into you only see what's external and you don't see the causes for it, which are internal. They're in your mind. If you go inside, then that has to be not inside the body because that doesn't have anything worth looking at for purposes of enlightenment. And you can't look outward in space because that's just further decay and further externalization. So to look inside, you're going to have to look inside the mind to find the worlds. That's the great mind you're talking about, ultimately, the Mahat, they call that. And that's synonymous with the Trinity. You might say Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva in our tradition. This is the great mind in its triple-fold aspect. So it's looking over everything, and it's beginning to make everything manifest from causal to subtle to gross. When it does get to the gross, then after the subtle elements, tanmatras, it says here from ether to air, from air to fire, fire to water, and water to earth. Those are subtle tanmatras or elements that are turning into the gross elements later on. And so that's why we read this, that Vishnu's and usually looked at as the Virat, the cosmic body, who's overseeing all this process of everything manifesting from causal to subtle to gross. And when it comes to the gross, then we'll have to take Yajnavalkya's very sparse description of that. From the projecting power that controlled the cosmic egg arose the ego, the separate self, and that ego had conceit, and it had a manifest body, but it was the chief person among all beings, the protector of all gross things. So when gross things started to manifest, then there's a protector there. We'll see that soon. There are some 9 or 10 different protectors that we'll look at in this new chart that Yajnavalkya mentions in this Upanishad. So he goes on and he says, these guardians of the senses and the sense organs that are objects, He cast them, having created them into the microcosm, due to his command, and conjured by this ego of the Virat, he projected the gross elements and projected the subtle ones prior to them. So first tanmatras, then the actual elements of rain and fire, earth, and so forth. Then all of a sudden everything has come from a seed form that's unmanifest to a seed form that's beginning to be manifested to a subtle form that the mind can now turn into subtle things like heavens, then into a gross form, which a body will be necessary for. So the deha, the body, becomes the last thing to appear in that process of unfoldment of all the worlds. Usually looked at in terms of time, long amounts of time in Hindu cosmology. So I'm trying to summate that quickly so I can get to the main point here, is that in the side of the state of the Jiva, when he projected them into this gross state, body and elements, they found that they could not act or vibrate. So he saw that, he desired to vivify them, splitting open the macrocosm, he created channels to them into the crowns of their heads. And though they were inert-like, they became like sentient beings and each started to perform their own functions. So this is like, relative free will. People started to take what little power they had and started to use it in various ways. If you take what power you have and start to bomb other nations or send nuclear rockets there, then the Lord's going to take that power away, because you think you have free will and you're just acting on it in an unwise way. So you'll find in a little while, those beings that use their little power unwisely, that power will be taken away from them and they'll be caught in the karmas that they created by the little power that he did give them. So this is how Sri Ramakrishna explains relative free will and free will. Look at next week's God blog to find that. So when beings found out that they couldn't really pulsate, is the word that the commentator is using here, they didn't feel like they were living when they were in the body. They felt constricted. They felt the restrictions of the senses, the limitations of the body, and so forth. Then he created this channel into them and split them at the crown of the head and entered into them as Shakti power, we would say. And at that point, then they began to act like sentient beings, and they began to perform all their actions, good, bad, and mixed. And then the omniscient Lord, with his concealing power, he calls it a streak of Maya in him. Then the sentient Lord, the omniscient Lord, conjoined with a streak of his Maya, entered into these bodies, and becoming diluted by bodies and limited, became the Jiva, due to self-identification with three bodies, and became the agent and reaper of fruits of action. So it's like Sri Ramakrishna is saying, even Brahman weeps caught in its own Maya. So when all of this is fully flushed out and fleshed out, to make a pun, then all of a sudden you've got these beings who are having animated power, and they're beginning to vibrate inside of these 7 lower and higher worlds, patalas and lokas they're called. And that's where we ended up last time in talking about the state of the Jiva. And Yajnavalkya concludes that chapter 1 by saying, possessing attributes like wakefulness, dream, and deep sleep, swoon, and death, like a chain of buckets attached to a water wheel, the Jiva became troubled, as it were, and began to act like it was born and that it dies. And it began to revolve like a potter's wheel. That's how Yajnavalkya is putting end to the first discourse that he's giving, this first chapter to Paingala. And so he's gone through all of this, which is a kind of Samkhya system of Vedanta of its own, the Upanishads. And Pingala's been listening to all this, hearing it. And so other ways in which that's been taught, for instance, are here, if we want to look at it really quickly. In one way, it's taught as a chest of drawers. So folded cloth of consciousness. Now we have here what's called the ancient chest of consciousness. So a folded cloth and a chest of consciousness, two different ways in which the Upanishads and the teachings of India are explaining to us this same process. In this way, we can draw from the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, the mother scripture. She says, "At the time of the great dissolution, I withdraw all beings and worlds back into my unmanifested prakriti." Okay, now here, look at here, how everything's getting pulled back to unmanifested prakriti. When? At the time of the great dissolution. So they have a word for that in Sanskrit, Mahapralaya. We can't find that word. We're thinking in terms of, an earth that was created and then all of a sudden develop the five elements externally, and then will someday get too close to the sun and burn up, and then the sun will explode, and this will take forever to do this, and then nothing will be left over because there's so many burnt stars and exploded worlds and already in view for us in space. Oh, that's going to happen to us one day, or some meteor is going to hit us and we'll be gone, and that'll be all she wrote. But the whole thing in India is looked at as that was a Mahapralaya, when all of those planets, stars, and people went back to their seed essence. And then it'll start ticking again when the cosmic clock starts. And everything that's held back in the Word will become manifest again. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. When the Word separates from God, this is what happens with seeds, and it begins to manifest seed objects. So all here, as Holy Mother used to say, is just thought made concretized. So that's very high thought you're talking about, coming from a very great mind called the Mahat. So I draw all worlds back into my unmanifested prakriti, while I myself disappear into the formless Brahman. When the dance of Maya begins again, I loose all things forth into the realms of becoming. All the while, nothing is born, nothing dies, nothing is created, nothing gets destroyed. I mean, talk about coming up to the source, who is the seeress of all of this process, including giving the seed words to Lord Brahma at the beginning of the cosmic cycle, and asking her, like Paingala is asking Yajnavalkya, what's the secret to aloneness? What's this high state that beings get into? And she would tell you that. Oh, this happens that I draw everything back into unmanifested prakriti of Yaktam at the time of dissolution, Mahapralaya. And then I myself dissolve into Brahman. So what's this Brahman? There's the state of aloneness that's supreme, right? Because you went into a state with subtle seeds, but then you went into a state with no seeds. Does it sound familiar? There are seeded samadhis that luminaries have, and there's one unseeded samadhi that they have. Seeded, S-E-E-D-E-D. It had seeds and then it didn't. So then she goes on to say, when the dance of Maya begins again, very nice. I know musicians who named compositions, Dance of Maya. And when this begins again, then I loose all things forth from their seated state back into manifestation. All the while, nothing's born, nothing dies, nothing gets created, nothing gets destroyed. So there's your look from witness consciousness at the whole process, forward and back, of involution from the source, which is seeds, out to evolution, which is all manifested objects, bringing it all back into a seated state again, and the witness standing there, one with Brahman, saying, nothing changed. See? This is just a dance of Maya. This is just a play. It's all rising. Back to this idea. It's all rising off the great mind, falling back into the great mind. The great mind just looks at it in wonder. Wow, look at the great Maya she created. What a play, what a sport. What an amazing thing. That's much more amazing than taking a telescope and looking out into space. When you open up this inner telescope and you look into this, whether it's Samkhya, Yoga, Vedanta, Tantra, and so forth, all the way up to Advaita, then you get the full vision of everything. Then you're truly amazed. And then you have the mystery of aloneness, that everything is one. But you also have the knowledge of how it's all connected when it plays. You see, as that Sri Krishna said, the young boy grabs onto the pole and twirls around, right? As long as he's got his hand on that pole, he's fine. But if he slips, hand slips off, and he falls and cuts his knee, goes running home for some antiseptic and a Band-Aid. So that means basically that this grip on the pole is really indicative of holding Brahman as the only reality all the time. Yeah. So that one quote alone is a study in itself. The reason that I brought this chart out to show in conjunction with the unfolding of the cloth of consciousness in the Paingala Upanisad is that all of this figures in Mahamaya, or what we call Mahashakti. She's the one that's tending this garden of the seedless state, of the seated state, that is unmanifested Prakriti. And there you see, starts at the top near her upper hand, withdrawal, Laya, Pralaya, Maha Pralaya. So these series of projection and sustenance and withdrawal are going on all the time at her behest. And then you see off to her right hand, sustenance, sthiti, off to her left hand, sportive play or lila. All of this is going on as described so nicely in both of these illustrations on these two charts. If we want to take slokas or teachings from different religions that relate to this from the standpoint of Ishvara or God with form, we could say, Krishna said, "Verily I have my manifested form and my unmanifested form." So here's all the manifested, and here's the unmanifested. And plus he's got the supremely unmanifested too, that is Brahman. Beyond both is my supremely unmanifested form. So he's talking about three different kinds of levels here, which are easily put into gross, causal, and subtle bodies, or gross, causal, and subtle worlds, these triputis that we talk about a lot. If you want to put it at a later date in terms of the teachings of Jesus, he said, "In my Father's mansion there are many chambers, abiding places, homes of rest, of peace, and of sojourn." So you may say basically the realms of sojourn are here in the lokas, right? Where people are taking on bodies, pretending themselves to be individuals, or forgetting entirely that they're connected eternally with the eternal Brahman, and then sporting as egos. That's that ego that has some conceit in it, Yajnavalkya is talking about. Even a little of it is still there in the Trinity, because it has to oversee all these worlds that are coming out of consciousness. As far as the actual analogy itself, the fold of consciousness, the folds of consciousness here, many finely folded levels, is basically what's being used here as the chest of drawers. So you see at the top there's Ishvara Avatar, or the Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, the cosmic mind over here. Then the next level, the first drawer is the causal realm, called Karna Jagrat. All objects as seed essences, i.e. bijams, is what it says to the left of it. The next chest of drawers, you want to say, is subtle worlds, sukshma jagat, all objects as mental constructs or thoughts. So there's the causal and subtle world. The next and lowest chest of drawers are the gross worlds, stula jagat, all objects as physical forms, i.e. matter. So notice the connection. If everything's getting dissolved back in at the end of pralaya, as Mother says up here, then all physical forms will turn to thoughts, and all thoughts will turn to seeds. And those seeds are all held inside of unmanifested prakriti, which the Divine Mother herself will tend. And when the next level of projection, shrishti, it's called, happens, then she'll loose them forth and into the realms of becoming. And everything will get born and manifest in these three phases. The proof of this for the individual human being who's trying to understand this is waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. You make correlations with that because this could happen over long ages of time, but it's actually, ironically enough and revealingly enough, happening every 24 hours with every individual. As they're having some certain amount of hours in the waking state, then they're going into dream, the next chest of drawers, and then they're going into deep sleep, which is the causal level. And they have three bodies that go with that. A gross body is with senses out here that we're operating through right now. Consciousness is associated with right now in this moment. Tonight we'll turn these off and we'll have 5 subtle senses, and we'll be in the realm of the 5 subtle tanmatras. These outer elements will go away and they'll return to thought elements, basically, is what it does. You're thinking about water, you're thinking about walking on a planet, you're thinking about drinking and eating. Everything has just gone to its subtler vibration of thought. That's part of that rising and falling of phenomena that's going on all the time. And then when you go deeper than that, and you say, well, I've eaten enough, I've had enough to drink, I've had enough action, as he's about to say in the Upanishad here, when beings get exhausted, then they go into deep sleep, like an emperor looking for a new chamber. That's what he says here. Like an emperor looking for a new chamber. He means when they die. So it's not just every day we get tired from working outdoors or something, we have to go to sleep. But he's talking lifetimes of that kind of activity. Beings get exhausted. And so like an emperor with a whole castle open to him, looks for a new chamber. These beings look for new bodies and come out fresh again to do more activities until they don't want to do that anymore. Then they'll get free. They'll find out the mystery of aloneness that Paingala is seeking here from a great teacher, and they'll get free of that kind of constant storing up of things in drawers or folding of consciousness that doesn't have any folds. So at the bottom here, you see some of the primal things. The primal residue of everything is called shesha. It's also the name of a great snake that's left over in the ocean of consciousness after everything rises. Vishnu actually sleeps on it. It's got 1,000 heads. You might have seen it. So Vishnu himself goes into a sleep of samadhi at that time. And all of this is inside of his great mind. And along with his brothers, Brahma on one side, Shiva on the other, they're responsible for creation, shrishti, withdrawal, sustenance, projection, withdrawal, laya or withdrawal, and sportive play, constantly, lila. This is why some beings come into the body like the great avatars and they just sport there. They have bliss there. They have peace there. They have higher wisdom there. Yes, they suffer there too, at this level of the lower drawer particularly. But they'll still come and they'll show the beauty of sportive play. That's called lila. In the case of of beings like Ram and Krishna and Ramakrishna. It's like Mahalila, a great sport. Not uh, uh, only two other things to say about this, and we'll look at this in the new chart I want to show you next, is all of these also correlate with our coverings. You see, we're talking about the concealing power and the revelatory power. That also happened to us as we fell into the state of the Jiva. We started off as a blissful, just a blissful sheath over us, like in deep sleep tonight. That's what they call that. Enjoying great bliss in an ignorant way is how Yajnavalkya puts it here. And then, because it doesn't know he's going to wake up again, right? It doesn't know that there are seeds there that it could water again. So that bliss will end and he'll come out and have to have pain and suffering and limited happiness and have their peace taken away and, get angry and go to war and various things like that are happening. But that's for later on. Right now, we're just pretty much at the unseated state. And we have a causal body that's just basically consisting of a kind of not fully informed bliss, like people here would enjoy. They're blissful. The kid's out playing blissfully, but he doesn't know that at home his father's waiting with a whip to spank him for not doing his chores. So it's that kind of bliss that you just give yourself to it, and then it has repercussions later. That's like deep sleep. We all go into it foolishly, and we don't know that's what's beyond it. Turiya, right? Jagat, Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, Turiya. That's the way the Advaitas teach that. And that's in this drawer. The subtle worlds when the subtle worlds, we have these three sheaths combined. Yajnavalkya says, Krishna says in the Gita, Shankara says in the Vivekachudamani, we've got good ways to correlate and reference this. The sheath of our intelligence, the sheath of our mind and its thinking, and the sheath of our energy that we're moving with. How our energy propels our thoughts at one level and how our energy compels our body at another level. All of these things are together in three of the five sheaths taught in Vedanta. And finally, at the lower drawer, you have the Annamaya Kosha, basically food only. When Yajnavalkya does his rendering of how the Brahman became the Jiva, which I'll show you soon, he talks about the gross body being just the five elements. He puts everything else into the subtle body. So basically that's Annamaya Kosha. We're going on. Oh, actually, one more thing to do here is how this wisdom, when it struck Western scientists' minds in the late 1800s and early 1900s, when Vivekananda brought it and started discoursing on it, some scientists woke up and said this: as we inspect it over periods of time, the universe becomes to look as more like a great thought rather than a great machine. So one of our favorite scientists of the 1900s, Sir James Jeans, I should say, actually said this. Oh, when we look at the universe, we're beginning to see it as a great thought. Okay, well, that's happening right about here, you see. But it's not happening beyond the physical universe yet. They're not thinking about subtle universes, heavens, because religion, that's its ground. And so science and religion have never gotten along very well for several good reasons. Both of them do not have the information that the Vedanta gives you, the ancient India rishis give you. So they're still at odds with each other. But the other thing he said here, mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We are beginning to suspect that we ought to rather hail it as the creator and governor of this realm. So that's a very powerful thought. That mind, probably pretty much thinking of it as a brain, right? So now all of a sudden they're thinking in the way that the Vedantists and the Buddhists do, oh, this mind is like the subtle body that's that's looking on the physical universe as a witness. It's giving rise to everything and watching it fall. There's a personage there in the mind, a great mind, a witness. And now we thought maybe somehow mankind was intruding into the physical universe and upsetting its balance. Now we're beginning to look at it as if that it's really the creator and governor of all of this. So that's, again, part way to the truth, because the creator and government is create. The universe is not created, it's non-originated from a great mind that's under the auspice of Brahman or Shakti, or Brahman and Shakti. So they still haven't gone deep enough and far enough in. They're gathering information on a more metaphysical level, you might say. But they have to get to beyond the intellectual frame of reference to the actual level that the seer sees things, like Yajnavalkya, or like the Divine Mother would explain it. So there, chest of drawers chart, nice, huh? And let's take another one as we're going along with it. This one specifies more that we're talking about a mind-only schools here, and this one makes no bones about it. It just puts it in terms of seeds. If we still can't grasp the fact that Yajnavalkya is talking about seeds, thoughts, back in unmanifested Prakriti that are tended by a great force called Shakti, or Mahashakti, Mahamaya, then why don't we just take a pumpkin and dissect it? And we'll look at it. So here, the quote is, "The seers of India have realized that everything in form proceeds from the mind. And this is why they have revealed the singular way leading to its dissolution." What's dissolution? The mind's dissolution, because it's the governor and creator of all this. Let's put it into deep sleep and watch it go away. Then let's see who's putting it into deep sleep and waking it up, right? And then you have the key to the one who owns the whole cloth, the one who owns the chest of drawers. Sri Ramakrishna has compared the mind's propensity for production to rice seed. It's called paddy, strewn across the ground before the rainy season sets in. A riot of growth is the result. But if these seeds are exposed to fire prior to their exposure to soil, their power of germination is destroyed. This fire is the practice of yoga, which renders the mind's proclivity for desire-based expressions nil and void. Opening the gate to samadhi. Oh, we're going to have to expand our vocabulary here, scientists and people of the West. A higher state of mind, samadhi, or no mind. There are many types of seated samadhis, of knowledge, of peace, and of bliss, etc. We'll go back to the sheaths, right? When you're in deep sleep, you're having a kind of samadhi. It's called nidra samadhi, sleep samadhi. And it's beautiful and peaceful and blissful, but it's not attended by the highest consciousness yet. It's still, a barrier between you, a little cloud of nescience kind of barrier between you and realization of your Atman. So anyway, those are the kinds of samadhis people who are having seated samadhis are experiencing. But there's only one kind of unseated samadhi. So that goes with the non-dual schools, or the conclusion of the mind-only schools. So there you see it spread out in a field before you. The delight of all children at Halloween. Basically, this whole seed of pumpkins there, just ready to be harvested. Let's take one apart, but first let's superimpose over that whole field exactly what we've been talking about in the folded cloth of consciousness and in the chest of drawers teaching of Divine Mother. At the top, start at the top, there you see 4 words and different traditions for that highest state of samadhi. Asampragyata means no seeds, no pragya, no seeds of intelligence there. They've lost their proclivity to germinate anymore, from the standpoint of the soul going into that samadhi. Some souls can rare souls can come out of that samadhi and develop seeds again and water them, and for the right reason, like avatars. There you see Satori under that, which is Zen's way of talking about that experience. Vedanta's way, because Asampragyasa Samadhi is yoga's way, Patanjali's way. Vedavyas's way is there when he talks about Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Nirvi, blown out, all the waves of kalpa thought, or imagination, or creativity, as the case may be, wiped out, like nirvana, nirvikalpa. And there is nirvana underneath that. So that's the background of everything. You can see it back there in the field of grasses. You might say that's just like representative of all the seeds in unmanifested Prakriti. The seedless state lies beyond them. Then first thing comes in the order of trickle down, because anthropomorphically, Yajnavalkya is not really dealing with this yet. He's about ready to tell Paingala about the guardians of, specify the guardians of the senses and of the worlds. So far, he's only mentioned one real deity, Vishnu, that Virat, who is in charge. Even in the great mind, he hasn't said Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva yet. So first thing anthropomorphically then that could be inserted into this, if we didn't want to stay honest to Yajnavalkya's rendering, we'd start to put in the deities in there, plug them in. So in this chart, you have them. The gods and goddesses are they, devas and devis. The celestials come next in mind. It's pretty much why I just chanted at the beginning of class, Om Jayu Shantihi, Antariksham Shantihi, Prasivi Shantihi. You've got all this levels in the folded cloths of all these various beings. And so peace to the gods and goddesses, peace to the ancestors, peace to humankind. And may that peace be with us and permeate us to the very core of our being. So this is what the seers are thinking about in this great Mahalila, this great unfolding of the, or let's call it folding of the cloth of consciousness. Look inside the folds and see what's developing in there, what's hiding there. Is it a piece of gold, or is it a poisonous spider? It's all things are possible inside of the folds of consciousness, as we can tell by our gross state here today, and horrible acts of violence that are happening just yesterday. So that's what's going on in the cause and effect worlds, karma-laden worlds. Ancestors fall under the celestials. If you come down, you see that prana and the senses are being refined to get to this place. If I were going upwards, then we'd be heading for the seedless state again. That's called involution. Since I'm coming downward, we're evolving. We're going down, and senses and prana, right? This is what Yajnavalkya told us here. When we came here, we had the 5 pranas that got us into the body. And we had the mind that directed everything. We had the organs of perception and the organs of action, all there in our gross and subtle body. So senses and prana are provided for there. There's the vital force itself. And then physical body on the outer shell of the pumpkin, and the 5 elements as primal matter out of which the pumpkin is growing. It appears to us that our bodies are made of 5 elements. And they are. But actually, before the 5 elements got hold of that and formed the human body, the prana was there to direct it, and our parents were there. And before that, the great ancestors were there for our bodies. And then, as it says here, then we might have come from heavenly realms, so the celestials were there. Or we might have been the sons and daughters of great beings like gods and goddesses, rishis and so forth. They were there, you see. So that's how you go back to the source of your body. Gross, subtle to causal is one way of putting it, but also just your your actual individual bodies that people are taking as they move into this cosmic play, this Mahalila. And there you see then off to the left, we finally cut the pumpkin open. And you can see some of the specified things there. Call this the subtle body, the internal mind. You're making the cut, and this is what the mind is projecting there. It's too small to read. I had to fit them on the seeds. I'll read them to you. Nature, the mind projects all of nature, and worlds are formed out of the various aspects of nature, both gross elements and subtle elements, tanmatras, are involved in that. They're at the foundation of it. So you can't be without tanmatras and their understanding and then say heaven is. I want to go to heaven. I believe in heaven, but I don't know anything about the tanmatras that formed them, you see. So that's the problem. One of the problems in religion today, for instance, is they don't have the philosophy attached to it. So heaven's just some sort of place where what goes? Where? Up. I take my physical body with me and others are left behind? No. It's an entirely different origin to things that you have to develop to know that heaven is formed by these subtle elements, just like earth was formed by these gross elements. And you can't leave that out of the picture if you want to involute back towards your source. So I paused there, but it does explain bodies and races, and also objects, gods, and God itself. You know, the idea of God itself is also a seed in that pumpkin. And across the whole thing, as you remember back here on this chart, we talked about Shesha being that snake at the bottom of the chest of drawers, primal matter. There it is, Ekarnava, the ocean of ethereal matter that's holding all of these things inside of itself. Just like everything here on earth probably came from the ocean, right? From water, they say. In that same way, everything inside, all the worlds inside, also came from these primal waters, developed in these primal waters. Very nice to find out someone like Vivekananda has found ways of explaining this to us. He says, it is this Lord, God. What did you do to me here? It is this Lord we are trying to realize from time without beginning in the objective. And in the attempt, our minds are throwing up such queer creatures of our fancy, such as man, woman, child, body, brain, earth, sun, moon, stars, the world, love, hate, property, wealth, also ghosts, devils, angels, and gods, and God, etc. Our minds are throwing up such queer features of our fancy. So, as if to say, let's go back to that Brahman that owns the field of pumpkins. Let's go back to that Divine Mother who contains within her the three drawers of the chest of consciousness. Let's go back to the great teachers like Yajnavalkya who can explain to us Brahman that holds all the folds of consciousness within it and straightens it out at the end so that it's just one purely unwrinkled cloth of consciousness that Vivekananda is mentioning here. Then the mind isn't throwing up creatures of our fancy anymore. Does that sound like deep sleep to you for a while or unseated samadhi forever? That's what I've been wanting to do for the last two classes, but I found this too much to deal with in just one class. But I wanted to show you other charts that have been created, 176 and 38. This was one of the earliest ones that described this process using mother as the basis. And this one is 434. So over the whole series of some 450 charts, the same process has been, I've come upon it described in different sampradayas and different darshanas. This one is specifically Vedantic with Yajnavalkya at its as the composer. Let's then look at this new chart so we give it some attention in this third class. Because it's a fourth way of explaining this, but it has one main distinction to it. It comes from our reading of the Upanishads. So, as I was saying, now Paingala asked Yajnavalkya, after everything's been explained to him about the folds of consciousness and the secret aloneness, Yajnavalkya ended up by saying the Lord, on creating individual bodies, then entered into them and became the Jiva. So this is just like Arjuna with Krishna on the battlefield. He wants to know more about this. In the same way with Paingala here and Yajnavalkya, he wants to know how Brahman can become a Jiva. That's a very strange saying for Advaita Vedantas to make. So basically, he asks, how did the omnipotent Lord of all worlds and the author of their manifestation, sustenance and dissolution, become a Jiva? So how did man become God, and how did God become man, and how is man nothing other than God with a few sheaths over it? And if that's true about Brahman entering into the context of name and form, how does it retain its realization of Brahman and still be a Jiva? There are many ways you can talk about this. It's like mukti and how to attain it. And people went to Sri Ramakrishna, and he saw them picking up the Ashtavakra Samhita. He'd say, don't read that. Read this. And he handed them the book Mukti and How to Attain It. So he wanted them to find out about the process of getting free, mukti, from all name and form, not just read about somebody who'd already done it, because then they would be jumping to these conclusions that they could do it too before they knew about the processes of things. So Paingala is one of those sincere aspirants who doesn't want to jump the gun on anything. He wants to systematically, level by level, fold by fold, drawer by drawer, and tattva by tattva, body by body, understand Yajnavalkya's great state of realization and hear it from the source. So how did the omnipotent Lord of all worlds become a Jiva? Because that's the last thing chapter 1 said. Yajnavalkya replies this: I shall speak distinguishing between the forms of Jiva and God. Following the generation of the gross, subtle, and quintuplicated gross elements, the Lord made individual and collective bodies, respectively. Earth is our skull, skin, intestines, bones, flesh, and nails. Water is blood, urine, saliva, perspiration, gastric juices, and so forth. Fire is hunger, thirst, heat, lassitude, sexual union, etc. Air is movements, transportation, breathing, coming, going. Ether is lust, anger, greed, envy, jealousy, and so forth. The gross body is skin. The gross body with skin is a combination of all this, fashioned through deeds. It is the basis of states like childhood, adulthood, and old age, conceit, and other numerous failings and changes. That's his first statement. So what he's saying here, and because it gets the Paingala Upanishad gets a lot more dense from this portion on. This other chart was a little bit difficult to understand, but if you see it placed in that context, you can see how things are moving in that way. Now, in order to explain it to Paingala, how Brahman becomes to Jiva, as it were, he's going to tell him about the three bodies. That's important here. He says, following the generation of the gross, subtle, and causal bodies, listen with exclusive attention. as I explained. So he's going to follow the ancient teaching of gross, subtle causal bodies that we saw back here. So basically, Stula Jagat, Sukshma Jagat, and Karna Jagat. It's an ancient teaching. So the ancient rishis knew that you had three bodies, not one, as I've often said. And your subtle body is like, can be described as deep sleep body, but that 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 begins to restrict it to the embodied state. That's not completely explanatory. The deep sleep body is also your causal body that you have after you've died. That's after consciousness has departed the physical body, then it goes to a subtle body in which it enjoys heavens. Then it goes to a deep sleep body in which it enjoys blissful ignorance, or ignorance tinged with bliss, bliss tinged with ignorance. And so those are actual bodies that the soul is abandoning and taking on as it goes back towards its source. And in similar fashion, then, in order to help people who are in physical bodies understand this, you can describe that as the deep sleep body. That's what it's like to be in your deep, your state of sushupti. And it's like trying to look for an English word, sushupti, that deep sleep state. I could read it all to you, and perhaps I will. Um, it's better probably to select things um, because it's very dense. That's why I had to put it in this chart. So pretty much he's talked about these earth, right? So your gross body, your subtle body, and your causal body, and these two hands of the mother who are projecting and withdrawing everything. And there's the sleeper, as it were, and the great sun of consciousness behind everything. But he's focusing on this column first in the gross body. He's talking about that. He says, earth is skull, skin, intestines, bone, flesh, and nails. So there you have them listed. So the idea there, before you can go on with the rest of these, but the idea is that if I'm thinking Mahapanchabhuta, I've got the five elements and their basis, foundational to everything that's going to happen in the gross body on the physical world. Then I'm going to fashion from that idea of solidity, which is a tanmatra, the idea of solidity. Everything's going to take on, some of these things are going to take on the characteristics of earth. Others are going to take on the characteristics of water. Others are going to take on the characteristics and qualities of fire, and so forth. So that's the way they look at this. Very few people would, look at water and think gastric juices, or look at water and, and think any of these, blood or urine. Even when you drink water, you're probably not thinking urine. That's just what happens later. But these are actual qualities and characteristics of fire as the basis of one of the five elements for everything in the gross body. And so it's a unique rendering that you don't find anywhere else in the teachings, that you find it inferred by the drinking of water and how the eating of food, um, uh, uh, brings together flesh and so forth, and bone. I mean, that's in a teaching in yoga. But basically, the way he's putting it here is just straight out description of these five elements being the foundation for everything that you see, that has liquidity to it, that has solidity to it, that has radiance or power or energy to it, that has space involved with it, and it has homogeneity, ether involved in it. So in that way, he's giving us a fivefold explanation of fivefold Panchamahabhutas in the classic Sankhya of Lord Copula here on Earth so that we can make the connections between everything that's solid, earth turned into that. Everything that's liquid, water, turned into those. Everything that's fire, uh, turned into that. So that's how he starts explaining right away how Brahman became the Jiva. He has to start at it with making a report on the three bodies. So he goes on then uh, and takes it into the eightfold city of the subtle body, he calls it. First, he manifested the principle of life, prana. The modification of the life principle are called prana, apana, vyana, udana, and samana. So there are the five pranas. Finally, we have a system where they're mentioned because we didn't find them in Lord Copula's Samkhya, didn't find them in Sri Krishna's discourses in the Gita, especially not in a fivefold form. So here they are, but Yajnavalkya is not stopping there. In the same way, he wasn't stopping with just saying, oh, look at the five elements, how they form everything. He went into each one of them and told you that everything, those things that resemble water, they're very similar to it. They're not water, but they're just similar to it, and so forth and so on. In the same way now, he's doing the same with prana, and here's what he says. That they have subordinate functions. They're called Naga, Kurma, Krikara, Devadatta, and Dhananjaya. They have their bases at the heart, the anus, the navel, the throat, and the limbs. In terms of Akasha, he manifested the organ of action. Its functions are performed by tongue, hands, feet, anus, and generative organ. The objects of these are speech, grasping, movement, excretion, and enjoyment, procreation. He manifested the inner organ next. Its functions are the mind, intellect, thought, and ego. And later on here, a surprise to me is cosmic mind. He puts in there with it. The objects of these are imagination, determination, memory, conceit, and investigation. Their bases are throat, mouth, navel, heart, and junction of the eyebrows. He then manifested the senses of cognition. Its functions are ears, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose. Their objects are sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. In Samkhya of Copula, we had to take those out of the Tattva Samasa Sutras and actually show them later on in yoga how they went across the board with each other. So he's just reading them out like the riot act on them right away. All of this is sloka 3. So it's a big long sloka where he's describing the subtle body. It's at this point that he brings in the overlords of all of this. He says the overlords of perception and action are the four directions, the wind, the sun, prachetas, asvins, fire, Indra, Upendra, Yama, the moon, Vishnu, Brahma, and Shambhu. So all of these are listed up here. I put them in the causal body just for the hell of it. They're like a combination of subtle and causal body. So you have the four divisions there. You see them. The four directions listed there. And prachetas, if you don't know that, it's like those are mind-born sons of one of the great beings. I forget how many there are of them. There are like almost a dozen prachetas, and they actually did such austerity in their own realm that they became overlords of human beings. They're sort of like Prajapati. And then the Ashvins, of course, are healing powers. They're twins. Fire is Agni, Yama is death. Indra is the overlord of all the other gods. And Upendra, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, of course, are all higher beings. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva being the Trinity. So this is where he went towards describing the overlords. His first insertion, you might say, of anthropomorphical beings inside of the whole sweep of his exposition and explanation about the folded cloth of consciousness. Oh, there are beings in there. I think it's very important and very great because you can have philosophy without the deities, and you can have, religion without the gods, and science without deities, and so forth. So these beings that have this wider grasp of things, they'll put together, the senses are, they call them indriyas. That means Indriya is listed right there, Indra. So the implication is the Lord of the senses, the Lord of all the other gods, is there in all of the little gods. And that's allowing you to see and allowing you to hear and allowing you to touch and so forth. And you couldn't do that if, that God had withdrawn your consciousness into deep sleep. So the senses are off. They don't see, their power is gone. So does that just mean that when your eyelids close, you're not seeing, and that's the end of it? Or is the actual power to see withdrawn when you go into sleep, whether your eyes are open or not? You've seen people sleeping with their eyes open. They're not seeing. So you've seen people, who have the power of the senses withdrawn. So in that way, then you see how there's a deity who is the Lord of the senses, who directs the consciousness back to them so that they can perform their functions, as you said here earlier. As soon as God penetrated into the crown of their head and vivified them, then all of a sudden they became sentient-like, and the eyes started seeing, the ears started hearing, so forth. Maybe it's obvious to everyone, but I like it that Yajnavalkya, great Vedantas here, is putting in these deities into the mixture. Now he says there are 5 sheaths of food, of vital breath, of mind, knowledge, and bliss. We already had them right here, right? The koshas, the 5 koshas. The sheath of food comes into being from the essence of food and develops by it, and is dissolved in the earth that is predominantly the nature of food. That is called the gross body. The 5 pranas, which we just looked at briefly, I had them put together there. Prana with naga in the heart, apana with kurma in the anus, jnana and krikara in the navel, and so forth. Put them in a line there so we have a fuller reckoning intelligently and of the 5 pranas. So these pranas, together with the 5 organs of action, constitute the sheath of vital breaths. So that's pranamaya kosha. The sheath of the mind is the mind together with the organs of cognition. So mind with senses is that sheath of mind. The sheath of knowledge is the intellect together with the organs of cognition. And these 3 sheaths constitute the subtle body. The sheath of bliss is the knowledge of one's essence. This is the causal body. So that way he's bringing into view for Paingala's consideration and probably contemplation later, these 3 bodies. He has to do this to answer Paingala's question of how Brahman got to be the Jiva. So of course we know Jiva's can't contain all of Brahman, and most of them, some of them are totally unaware of Brahman, just to be matter of fact about it. But that consciousness that's in the jiva is Brahman. That Atman that's in the jiva is Brahman. So it's there, isn't it? So then it has to be kind of acknowledged that it's not missing. It's just not cognized yet. It's not seen yet. So Yajnavalkya already said that as Brahman enters into this state of the jiva, it begins to lose its grasp on all its powers when it begins to identify with the body, the senses, and the vital energy. So all of this has to be described to Paingala so he knows how consciousness got into this and still remains Brahman. It still remains absolute, even though it is beginning to associate, i.e., or identify with senses and body and objects. So there's the beautiful distinction, is that those beings who identify their consciousness with objects and senses and energy become that and forget their true nature. But those beings who only associate with body, senses, and energy, they don't forget their true nature. And so that those are two words in English that we can call forth here nicely. Identification as opposed to or contrasted to association. He goes on to say, and here's where this comes in, the eightfold city of the subtle body. The eightfold city, the total subtle body, then consists of this: 5 organs of cognition, 5 organs of action, the 5 breaths, the 5 elements like ether, that's the tanmatras, the 5-fold inner organ, 5-fold, right? So there's where he mentions mind, not just 4-fold, but 5-fold. The 5-fold inner organ, plus desire, action, and tamas, make up the subtle body. The 8-fold city of the subtle body. It's just like, his particular and personal name for, assignment for the subtle body. Putting all these together, he says, then is actually just a name for Vishnu, the Virat. The field of actions and thoughts, everything born from them, is also a name of Vishnu, it's called Vishva. As God's command entered the subtle body of the individual and supervising the mind, it became Tejas, shining. Tejas is its appearance. Dream fashioned is a name of Tejas. By God's command, the self, with the adjunct of Maya, together with the unmanifested, entering the individual causal body, became Pragya. So this is how he's beginning to start us into chapter 3, by bringing forth waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, and who you are in them, right? So basically, Vishva, Tejas, and Pragya are names for you in your different states. So you have 3 different states, you have 3 bodies for them, and you have 3 different names in those states. That's a triple Triputi teaching. And another reason why we have to look at the presence of the deity in everything, Vishnu and these basic overlords. And the last sloka of chapter 2 is, he says, sayings like Tat Twamasi, declare the identity of Brahman with Brahman of the awakened Jiva, theretofore before concealed by ignorance and part of the unmanifested, not of the other two, the empirical and the illusory jivas in the waking state and the dream state. So he's bringing us toward the end of chapter 2 in this. And that's where we'll have to take it up in a further class, because he starts out by saying, consciousness reflected in the mind, inner organ he calls it, participated in 3 states, merged into states of wakefulness, dream, and deep sleep, like a chain of buckets attached to a water wheel, and afflicted. The jiva, as it were, became born and died. As it were is actually a part of the sloka. So there you see them here coming next, waking, dreaming, deep sleep. In Yajnavalkya's case, he provides for questions that are kind of come from people who might protest about this by adding in swoon and death to the 3 states. And swoon later on he describes as being like being hit on the head with a club. I mean, that kind of thing. And then your senses are not completely gone, like in deep sleep. They're coming in and out. So people who are unconscious are like trying to get conscious, and their senses are trying to get activated by consciousness, but they've had that blow of the head and so forth. So he actually goes a little bit into that. And then he talks very deeply about death in a very, very uncharacteristically Vedantic way, and more like in a Tibetan Buddhist way of talking about the bardos. So that's all to come. And so we've made our way through about half of chapter 2. And we've looked at this chart, which I want to come back to, because there are things here, of course, that I read, but to put them in their actual categories, we can leave a week if you want to look back on your notes and look at this class too. If that's possible, you can find out about all 3 of your bodies. You can see where Shankara got his definition of the causal body too, by Yajnavalkya's rendering of it in the Upanishads. Probably to end on a very positive note here, then this quote here is good to read. Yajnavalkya tells Paingala, after he describes about the gross body, the subtle body, and the causal body, as if to caution him against leaving that as a Brahman, because Brahman is, is associating with all of this to become the Jiva, and then it could just as easily give it all up and go back to its source in the case of a person who's awakened. Then, so in case that Paingala has any thoughts that way, or anyone in the future would read it that way, he says, at the end of many lives of good deeds, beings seek liberation. Resorting to a fine teacher and serving him well, they inquire into bondage and liberation. And so that ends us with this quote, which I didn't start off with, but it's so good that I left it to the end. Bondage results from lack of inquiry. Liberation results from inquiry. Therefore, investigate at all times, Paingala. One's own nature may be determined through superimposition and its repudiation. Therefore, always inquire into the nature of the individual self and the supreme self. When the state of Jiva and that of the world are sublated, Brahman alone, which is non-different from the inner self, remains. So therefore, from that standpoint, the Jiva is Shiva, as my teacher used to say. Has to be seen from that higher look and view that comes from direct experience of Brahman. So that's very Vedantic there, of course. What is all of this? It's a covering power That's Tantra. What is all of this? It's mind's projection. That's the mind-only schools. What is all of this? It's nothing other than Brahman when you take away all of its superimpositions. That's Vedanta. False superimposition, Vivarta. And so different ways, different darshanas of India have explained this to give people of all different tastes and temperaments a way into their true nature, because that alone is real. All else is just study and verbalization with words, from higher to lower, with thought, from higher to lower, with wisdom, from apara to para. Following that trail and that track, a person, as he said here in this quote, after many lifetimes, will inquire into the nature of liberation along with this misfiance that I'm bound. Let's see, that I was ever bound. So with that, we'll leave us in that higher note, as I said, with a few of these notes. Om Drisham Pratitam Pravilapayan San Sanmatram Ananda Kaunam Vibhavayam Samahitas San Bahir Antaram Va Kalam Dayetaha Sati Karma Bande Om Brahman is an indeterminable mass of pure conscious awareness, ever free. Therefore, take what is internal and what is external and render it into one indivisible state. Then meditate upon that state, pass your time contentedly, and be free. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat.